Today I'm making this large walnut picture frame. It's got this sweeping curved profile and it's made almost entirely on the table saw. This is what 15 years of fading looks like. So we bought this puzzle about 15 years ago and it's been hanging on the wall of our kitchen ever since. It's really great because we got bird feeders in the backyard. So I knew it had gotten a bit faded, so as a surprise I bought my wife a new version of the puzzle and we put it together over the Christmas break. But wow, the amount of fading was actually, we were quite shocked as to how vibrant the colors were on the new puzzle. And in case you're wondering, this is the puzzle glue that we use, Mod Podge Puzzle Saver. Just get it at the craft store. I've been reading online and these puzzle glues combine the glue with also a little bit of lacquer so that it gives a bit of protection over top. So it goes on white, dries clear. This one is a matte finish, which we think looks good. The old puzzle had been framed with this red oak frame, which was fine, but I wanted to make something new. And in particular, I thought something darker would look better, so I'm going to pull out some of my walnut. My walnut is a bit over 7 inches wide, which is too wide for my jointer. Now, normally I would just rip these down the middle and proceed, but I haven't quite figured out what I want to do for the profile of the frame, so I want to keep these as wide as possible for as long as possible, so I'll be using a jointer sled to joint these with my planer. And with one face nail flat, I can go on to plane it to thickness. And there we have some lovely planed walnut. Now I just need to figure out what I'm going to do for a profile. And at the same time, I'm going to prepare just a piece of 2x4 because I want something that I can practice with as I'm preparing it. And so all the practice cuts can be made on this cheap wood and not on my precious walnut. And now comes the point of no return because I want to reuse this backing board, and unfortunately, like 15 odd years ago, I think I must have glued this down or something, so this unfortunately is the end of the line for this old faded puzzle. I'm probably going to put the new puzzle on this nice clean back, but I want to get rid of the thickness of this, so oh, this is not good. I wish I had a wide belt sander. I would just send it through that. I'll check back in a little bit later. I think that is better than I could have hoped for. So there was a bunch of prying, a bunch of chiseling, a bunch of sanding, and then even a bunch of scraping, and the result turned out really good. And I made the comment about glue earlier, and of course I realized I'm going to have to glue this one down too because I don't want it to bulge in the middle, and it's a big piece. And I don't plan to put it behind glass. You might argue with me about that one, but the first one we lasted for 15 years without glass, so I'm not planning on doing that with this one either. It's a big picture, so I want a pretty wide frame, but I also don't want to get into the sapwood. So measuring the wood that I've got, I've decided on 2 3/4 to be the size that I'm going to rip these to make the individual pieces of frame. And guess who forgot to push record on the camera? Anyways, I got my 4 pieces of stock and I got my practice piece cut to my 2 3/4 inch width. So my frame stock is all 7/8 of an inch thick, and you already know that it's 2 3/4 inch wide. So I've drawn a bunch of boxes that size on some paper so I can sort of doodle some ideas for what I want to do for the frame. And I've come up with 3 different plans for frame stock, and I think this third one's the one I like the best. And if you don't quite understand what I'm talking about there, the idea is that this diagram represents sort of a profile of the end of the frame stock. So I have to take this 2-dimensional thing and imagine it in 3 dimensions. And so what I've planned here is you need a notch in this corner, and that's where the artwork fits into, and that's going to be about 3/8 by 3/8. Starting over here, then I have a great big round over on the end. Then I'm going to measure down and I'm going to cut it off at an angle so it looks kind of like that. And then finally I'm going to make a nice big shallow curving cove in there, and then I think the rest of it will just sort of get smoothed over so there's no sharp points. In terms of order of operations, I think the round over is the first cut that I think should be made. The next will be the angled cut, which I measured and happens to be pretty much exactly 80 degrees, which makes it easier for tilting the blade. Of course, I first tested it with this piece, and you can see on the pattern that it pretty much lines up perfectly with that line that we're aiming for. So next is the cove. For cutting coves on the table saw, the idea is that you are pushing a piece of wood over the saw blade, but not straight through the cut, but diagonally, and that lets it carve an arch like that, a cove. And so to do that, I've got a fence that I've clamped diagonally above the blade. I tilted the blade to 10 degrees. I got that idea from Matthias Wandel. The idea is that you're not putting so much pressure on the side of the blade, but you're sort of coming along the top of the blade. The blade starts out quite low, and then you will raise it up a bit with each successive pass. And even then, I did, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 practices on complete scrap before I even got to trying it out on the on the actual test piece that I have. And I think I have it set now. So let's run an actual test and see what it looks like. So here's the end result. It's a bit of a sharp point here, but I will take care of that with just some sanding. And I think I'm going to go a little bit shallower on the actual pieces. Slow and steady wins the day. One other little thing to keep in mind is you don't want to get your piece thrown away from the blade. You have to keep it tight up against this fence. If I was going to be cutting a lot of pieces, I would clamp a second board here so that it was completely pinned. But since I'm just doing 4, I'm just going to be very, very careful. And here's my finished profile. Not gonna lie, I was hoping for something a bit smoother. It should stand out okay, but I think that is probably the fault of my blade. I have using a combination ATB blade, which has got these little points on the corner. And sanding is boring, so let me show you what happened next. I put the dado blade in my table saw, and then using a sacrificial fence, I set the height and the width that I want for the inside dado on my picture frame. And here's a close-up of the curve we ended up with. I think it's actually a really nice looking, elegant frame. And if you look back at the original design, this matches pretty much perfectly what I had drawn out here on paper. And the puzzle has since been mounted to that backer board, so I know how big I now need to size the frame. I like to cut my picture frame miters on the table saw, and I use this 90-degree angle jig for that. Once I have one piece cut, I use that to mark the other one so that they are identical. At just 24 inches wide, my assembly table isn't big enough for this frame, so I had to jury rig up these wings here so that I had something big enough to lay this out on for the glue up. And I'm hoping that everything is flat. And when it comes to clamping up picture frames, I really like a strap clamp like this one. I'll put a link to it down below. It really helps with putting even pressure all the way around. I do find this part of the process very fiddly. You gotta spread glue all over the place, thick enough to hold, but you don't want anything squeezing out. And then you got to wrestle with the strap, get everything nicely at a right angle. Much as I love the strap clamps, they are a bit fiddly at first until they finally start getting tight, and then you snug everything up, and then you're fiddling and you're looking for gaps. But it's all good now, and we'll check back in tomorrow. And the next morning I can do a test fit, and that is looking really nice. I made this little medallion on my laser cutter, and I'm going to get that installed now on the back of the frame. It's 1.5 inches in diameter, so I need an 1.5 inch Forstner bit. Thought I'd use Danish oil for a finish this time. It's easy to apply, just wipe it on, let it sit for 30 minutes, and then wipe it off again. That lovely walnut color. And after an evening to dry, here's what it looks like. Now it's an oil finish, so I'm going to let it cure for several days, but I did want to show you what the final product's going to look like, which is something like that.